morning, everybody. It is Tuesday, April 15th. We're back here on the RAS Picks YouTube channel, as well as Apple and Spotify, and streaming on X as well, talking about defensive players and how scouts hypothetically would bet these players if they were allowed to bet. Now, just like we did yesterday with the offensive players, this is not a show to imply that NFL scouts are actually betting on the draft. It is instead reviewing the draft guide. It's a thick one from over at golongtd.com. These are scout reports that are presented off the record by Bob McGinn over at golongtd.com, Tyler Dunn's website. Yesterday, we went through every position on offense. We went through about 4 or 5 players for each. I pulled out all of the relevant commentary to anything relating to these defensive players and how they may be drafted. Today's show, we're going to go through the defensive positions, pull out any of the defensive players that stand out, any notable quotes, and we'll talk about each of them as we go through in the episode. If you have not yet signed up for the free email newsletter, footballbetters.com is the place to go. Sent out a link earlier this morning on X, sent out a new edition yesterday of the newsletter, going a little bit more in depth with what we talk about here on the live stream. Same thing will be going out a little bit later today. It is free to sign up. It is free to follow. You'll get updates all off season long, preparing you for everything you need to know going into the regular season. Footballbetters.com is the website to go and the website to sign up. Very good morning to Ryan Roberts, live in the live chat on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, you can comment on the right side of the window. Get any questions or commentary you like as we go through. Let's start off with the first position today, defensive line. Now, this is dominated by Mason Graham right now as we're talking about defensive tackles first. We'll start with edge rushers after. And Mason Graham is defensive lineman number 1. But there's some interesting commentary from these scouts off the record that maybe add a little bit different of a thought process to how he's currently being priced, which is at 5.5, with the under currently shaded for Mason Graham to as high as minus 155. There's a lot of expectations from a lot of draft experts that Mason Graham will go number 5 to the Jacksonville Jaguars. James Gladstone, the new general manager for the Jacksonville Jags, has been very open since the combine interviews, talking about how they want to build the trenches, how they want to solidify the offensive and defensive line. They added 4 offensive linemen in the free agency window and did very little to bolster the defensive line. And so that's where the connection comes for Mason Graham to the Jacksonville Jags. However, we have 2 full pages of comments from Bob McGinn over at golongtd.com, which are from scouts that mention how there's some doubts here with Mason Graham. And it's pretty damning in some ways. The first scout that said right at the top of the quotes, he's got strength and balance as a rusher, but I don't see a wow speed or quickness guy. I've seen a guy mentioned as a top 5 pick. Bleep, he's not that. So it starts off pretty rough on Mason Graham, but then there's more. I could see him going in the top 12. So the second scout says, a third scout, but top 5 or second pick in the draft, that is just not what he is. I like the guy. You know what you're getting. I don't think he's a difference maker by any stretch in the league. A fourth scout said, I just don't see the domination. Now, there's some criticism about his arm length, how often he finds himself on the ground. There's some knocks on him for that. And so, again, this is not something I would say to take as gospel and run to the betting window and act on this. I'm doing this because we are buried with coach quotes. We are buried with GM quotes. We are buried with draft expert analysis. Everybody's got a thought. Everybody's citing a lot of the same stuff at this point in the draft handicapping process. I just don't see a lot of this stuff being shared. And the point of these episodes yesterday and today is to say, like, here's another data point from people who work for these teams that are presenting their cases for who should be drafted, when and where, behind the scenes in these draft rooms. And it's just a bit of a lower sentiment from this side of the handicapping process on Mason Graham. So is that run and bet the over? Not implying that, but it's something to keep in mind. Now, what I did see, NFL Daily with Greg Rosenthal had an episode with Ollie Connolly yesterday, and I have not had time to listen to it yet, but there was a case, as I could see in the show notes, that was presented as to why Mason Graham could potentially slide a little bit further in the draft. I've not yet heard that. If you're in the live chat and you have, let me know what that stance might have been. I was doing a spaces last week with Connor Allen from 4 for 4, and there was a viewer who was on the show who's clearly on the sharper betting side of the space. I wasn't super familiar with him. Connor was, and he was making the case for betting Mason Graham's second defensive lineman, which would be inclusive of edge rushers being taken, and that was around minus 600. And so as I'm looking at that, currently trying to see the odds for the positional totals, that's still a very steep price. In the drafts specials specifically, defensive lineman second to go, Mason Graham, is minus 700. And so on that stream, there was some sharp sentiment on him being the second defensive lineman taken. And there's some counterpoints, I guess, being made by different sources overall. Brandon says Matt Miller took a pretty firm stance on the Jags scooping him at 5 yesterday. He's almost certain not to go 1 to 4. And I haven't seen a lot of other cases for where he goes aside from Jacksonville. So I certainly agree with that. Walter Nolan, defensive lineman number 2. He's the best 3 technique by far. One scout said he'd probably be at the top of the list if you could just not see him between plays, between drills, between meetings. With Walter Nolan, there seems to be some character concerns. Said he followed the money everywhere, but yet is very quiet and shy. You would think he is totally disinterested. It's going to take a D-line coach that's going out of his way to be able to stand on the table and say, I can coach this guy. So defensive lineman number 2, Walter Nolan, a bit of character concerns that tend to kind of skew his ability. Alfred Collins, not going to be a Pro Bowler or a 10-sack guy. First round for sure, says a second scout. Talented, but inconsistent. Kenneth Grant was number 4. One scout said they like him better than Mason Graham. He has a length push. He's aggressive. I take him over Mazi Smith. He was way better than Graham. A third scout said not even close. Another counterpoint says he's 7th on his list of defensive tackles. In the guide, he was listed as 4th. A lot of comments about his size and ability. Some question whether or not he's able to sustain that over the course of a game in the NFL level. A lot of divisiveness over him specifically. So interesting comments about Kenneth Grant. I know when you're looking at some of the odds that hit the board today, they were at Canby Books last week. Now we're seeing DK take it on. There's first round odds that are being posted for a lot of different guys. Kenneth Grant is minus 380, and that's a price that's been bet up a little bit. So there's some higher expectations on Kenneth Grant overall. And then once you get to Williams from Ohio State, Derek Harmon at Oregon, that's when the commentary shifts from guys being consensus first rounders into a guy like Williams, who says, I like him in the second round, according to a scout. Derek Harmon was fringe first round, second round. So that's where it really starts to kind of taper off. So I would say from this group, you're looking at 4 guys, certainly, from the scouting commentary on where these guys are going to go and where they're going to end up. And then you obviously are adding in edge rushers from that, which is where we're going next when you're looking at some of these defensive line numbers for positional totals, where that is at 8.5 for the first round. And that 8.5 is currently shaded over minus 140. So number 1 in the edge rushers, obviously Abdul Carter. There wasn't anything specific that would make me view him differently in a similar way to maybe how Mason Graham and some of the commentary gives you a little bit of an extra data point. For Abdul Carter, he's just what you want up there in the top of the first round. He's a Pro Bowl player. He's got everything you're looking for as an edge rusher. There was some commentary. It said that there were 4 different scouts that expressed some concerns about Carter's makeup. There's also another comment that said, among all of the scouts who were asked, there's a very strong consensus that he is the top defender out here in the draft. And I think that's a very common sentiment. I don't think there's any surprises there. Abdul Carter, number 1. Jalen Walker listed as edge rusher number 2. Nothing stood out for like timing specifically. He is very much viewed as a first round guy. That's never really been in question compared to Nolan Smith. His former teammate, Eagles, took him 30th overall. His expectations are that he is going to end up going much higher. Shamar Stewart was number 3. Another guy similar to Carter, just not a lot of commentary that has him pegged one way or the other that would be different from where he's being listed in the draft and mocks right now. Expectations are that he is going to be in the first round as well. So that's 3. The one guy that certainly stood out was Michael Williams. There's commentary. I thought this guy was better than Trayvon Walker. Obviously went number 1 overall to the Jags a couple years ago. If he had the year that he was supposed to have, he would have challenged for first overall pick in this draft. And that's something that I remember hearing on the conference call back in February as I was going through and really starting to get like a baseline on these guys and learn about them. There was commentary from Daniel Jeremiah answering all the Georgia questions that were coming his way. And he was just presented him as a guy that, again, had that number 1 overall potential. But because of this past year and how it played out, he's fallen off, not for any physical reasons necessarily, but just because he didn't meet expectations. That led to some commentary about how he reminds him of Boogie Basham that came out of Wake Forest and bounced around 4 seasons, 4.5 sacks. He's a guy I think that comes with a lot of variance at this position for where he might end up going or where he might end up falling. His over-under right now is 15.5, shaded to the over at -130. Firmly in the first round, no question. I think it's going to be an interesting positional total to watch. James Pierce, lots of divisiveness over where he's going to go. Poorest of the top 20 at the position. Not soft mid-first round, had top 5 buzz, and then disappeared in some big games. Probably goes after Williams, Carter, and Stewart was another quote that really stood out to me from one of the scouts for where he is going to be placed. Mike Green is at number 6. He's the number 2 edge, said one scout. I wouldn't want him as a D end, but he could be a difference maker as a 3-4 linebacker. Hell of a player. He's probably got the second best pass rush arsenal of all of these guys. Now, the problem with Mike Green, which makes him another like very divisive candidate, a couple allegations of sexual assault that were dropped. Nothing was convicted. There was no crime. There was another one allegedly in high school. But what that's led to was another scout who said, we didn't have him in the first round. There are people that do. If he goes in the first, it's more the latter because of that character, which is pushing him further down the board than his talent should be. So there's character concerns with Green because of those allegations that might end up taking a guy who has extremely high talent and pushing him down the draft board a little bit. Now, the market has disagreed with that so far, as Mike Green is 17.5. The under is shaded to -150. So there are 5 guys, I would say, firmly there that gets you to that 8 number when you're looking at the positional total for defensive linemen. I think you can make the case if you're expanding from adding in one of those extra defensive tackles, or you're looking down the board, like we still haven't from the edge rusher position talked about a guy like Donovan Ezeraku from Boston College, who's been tied to the Green Bay Packers in the early to mid-20s. He's all the way down at 10th in the Bob McGinn rankings. And so there's a couple guys between Mike Green and Ezeraku who we haven't even talked about, who had comments end of first round, early second round. And so as we get back to these hypothetical questions, how would these scouts, if they could, be betting on the draft? I think they would be looking at defensive linemen and edges selected in the first round over 8.5. Just looking at some of these 2 or 3 guys at the DT position, 2 or 3 guys at the edge rusher position that would get you somewhere over that 7 mark. And based on the commentary about wide receivers, which was pretty negative, based on the commentary about offensive linemen, which was pretty negative, based on the commentary about running backs in a way, which was just all shifted towards there's so many guys between 3 and 11 for running backs. Why you're going out of your way except for the top 2 guys. And so you kind of put all those things together. I think yesterday's show just painted all these positions in a very negative light. And then today we're hearing a lot of positives about these D lines. And so I know it's a very deep class at the D line, and that's certainly something to keep in mind. But if you're reading through this and you're looking at the comments, There's a lot more guys here that I think you could be comfortable pegging in the first round than those other positions. So I would say hypothetical bet number one that you could take away on the defensive side from the scouts, if they could bet, would be defensive lineman edges in the first round over 8.5. Next position up is the linebacker group. There was one comment from an executive that said Jahad Campbell seems to be the consensus choice for the first linebacker drafted this year. He could go in the top 20, said an AFC personnel man. The 5 guys after him, those guys are all probably second round to high fourth round. And so this is not something that is going to be able to be actionable, as you're not seeing that market offer just because it is so one-sided. And it is slanted so much that one way. But when it comes to Jahad Campbell, it was interesting to read through a lot of his numbers and a lot of his comments and a lot of these stats. There just wasn't a lot of negatives other than the surgery for the labrum after the combine. Otherwise, all of this was very, very positive and very different. As you get to number 2, Mondin from Georgia, other guys behind him, they're all second round, third round, fourth round comments. Of any position group, the difference between number 1 and number 2 for where they're going to end up going, I would say was the most drastic of any that I read through in the 100 and some plus pages. And so that certainly stood out to me. Very top heavy at the linebacker position for how these guys are labeled. Now, something to keep in mind as you're looking at some of these positional totals is you could have some of these edge rushers presented as a linebacker for their draft eligibility that don't match necessarily what is in these previews and how they're written up. So be sure to keep in mind at the sportsbook you're looking at, based on the totals they have, especially as more places open up in the next few days. Just keep in mind the difference between edge and linebacker and how guys are classified, because that's going to have a difference between the edge rusher and the linebacker spot. So keep that in mind for a guy like Walker. Obviously, a guy like Campbell as well, for how you're tallying these guys up and where they're going. Going on the cornerbacks, this is a video that I did late last week talking about like who is number 5 and where does this come from. And so I was looking at under 4.5 for anybody following the accounts. And that price has now gone up quite a bit. It's under 4.5 at minus 295. So again, as we talk about positional availability and designation, Travis Hunter is going to go into the draft as a cornerback. And so he is obviously number 1. It's just a matter of where he goes inside the top 3. There were commentary around him. Some said he's a better receiver than a corner. Others says he's a better corner than receiver. He might be number 1 over Abdul Carter. We ended up with him on the corner board because we felt there was a million receivers and there's only 8 decent corners. There was some comparison to Champ Bailey. Nothing but positives around Hunter. He's going to be cornerback number 1. He's going to go inside the top 3. That's nothing news breaking there. Now, as we talk about like the 4 guys that could go in round 1 and should go in round 1, Will Johnson is number 2. Comments around him: as pure of a corner, I have him over Hunter at the position. That was pretty bold. Reminds me of Pat Surtain. He's got to prove he can be durable, though. Then there were some comments. It's a buyer beware pick because of the injury history, because of alleged concerns about him milking injuries during the season and potentially staying out more than he needed to. There was another scout that adamantly disagreed with any comparisons of Will Johnson to Pat Surtain and said that he saw him as more of a second rounder, a lesser athletic version of Christian Gonzalez. Now, he has been a very kind of back and forth prospect the last, I would call it about a week, since he announced that he was going to work out yesterday. Today, he is visiting with the Las Vegas Raiders. His number initially opened up at 11.5. And now it's, I'm not seeing it up at a few places. That 11.5, I thought was a number that was put up perhaps just like a little bit quickly. There was some hype about where he's going to fall, but he also had an impact on some of the other corners, which were priced as well, because there was kind of uncertainty about what he was going to do and what he was going to participate in and show. And so that's changed, but there is like overwhelming consensus he is a first round draft pick and makes up number 2 of the corners. Number 3 is Maxwell Hairston from Kentucky. Quote said, reminds me of Janoris Jenkins coming out of Florida, but faster. And then I think he's definitely a first rounder. Running that time at the combine solidified it. Interesting thing with Hairston is all of this commentary can be paired last week with commentary about how his stock was one of 3 or 4 guys highlighted as rising from some key draft experts. And so Hairston was very much, as I viewed it, a fringe first rounder. But then after seeing those comments last week and seeing these comments in here, I think there's a lot of certainty that even if it's a team like the Bills late in the first round, there's certainly stopping points for Hairston at a few different teams in the back end of this first round. But his price continues to increase, and it looks like as I pull up the first round picks, I'm bouncing around a little bit here, as you can hear me kind of jumping back and forth between reading and between looking as well. Hairston right now minus 250 to go in the first round, and so that's a price that continues to tick up day after day and is probably going to go a little bit further. So that's 3 cornerbacks, I think, confidently in the first round. And then the 4th would be Jahdae Barron from Texas. Now, back on the conference call in February with Daniel Jeremiah and all of the NFL media, there were about 450 people on the call. He's answering questions. He was asked about Barron specifically, and he says that he was really high on Barron. I think he said he was higher than almost anybody that he spoke with on Barron as a cornerback. But even back in February, he said he thinks the league is going to be lower on him because so much of his time is tied to the nickel position, which gets devalued by teams across the league. And so that was kind of a quote that I highlighted and circled back in February. Last week, there was more commentary about that, and it was referenced specifically that he should go somewhere in the 20s. Now, what's interesting is I keep that in mind and I'm reading through this. First comment from scout number 1 in the report. First thing highlighted, goes in the 20s. So you have that standing out. Another one, he's a really good football player, but he's late first round. Third scout, I think he's more second round, potentially even early third round. So nowhere in the scouting report is there anything of high first round, above average first round. We have February with the conference call, really high on him, great talent, reflecting everything said in here, but think he's going to slide because of his position. We have the commentary from last week, good talent, but think he's going to slide because of his position into the 20s. Multiple references of him going in the 20s. And like you start to think about how a guy like Johnson could maybe slide a little bit, how a guy like Barron maybe slides a little bit. Hairston, end of the first round. I think it's tough to get to 5 corners. Now, if we're putting, again, the hypothetical bet on the line here, and like, what would the scouts be betting if they could? I think you would be looking at them betting under 4.5 cornerbacks. And I think you'd certainly be looking at something, again, I've been saying for about a week now since other videos that I've done. Jahdae Barron's over 17.5, minus 200. And so if there's truth to him sliding and falling, I think you're probably going to see that over at 17.5 continue to increase, 18.5, 19.5, as there's multiple comments, unlike a lot of other guys in here, of going somewhere in the 20s. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, where's 5, 6, 7? Benjamin Morrison, multiple quotes here. He's a second-round guy, was looking like a late first-round draft choice until Game 6 last season when he suffered a torn labrum in his left hip that required season-ending surgery. He will work out on April 19th in Arizona, so that could change things a little bit for the perception around Benjamin Morrison. If he's not totally healthy, he'll go top of second, says another scout. Thomas from Florida State, he had a shot to go late in the first round before he ran a slow 40 at the pro day. He was easily going to be a first rounder, and then he didn't run well. He is going to definitely drop because of that. His card will be marked up in red, so it will be hard to turn it in. Another scout says, I still think this guy is a solid second rounder. Siobhan Ravel from East Carolina. This is a solid day 2 guy, but then the picture changed dramatically on September 18th when he suffered a torn ACL. Surgery was performed on October 15th before he got hurt. he was trending to be a first-round corner. So maybe now after that, he goes in the second or the third. So you have Morrison, Thomas, Ravel, 3 guys that are right on the edge that would make this bet go over 4.5, that have injury concerns, that are working out late, that have issues coming out of last season physically. And you're just thinking about these top 4 guys that are sliding towards the back of the first. It puts yourself in the position of some of these teams. I don't know if anyone's willing to use one of those late picks when there's going to be an abundance of D-line and edge guys, and you have these top 4 corners, which are going to be available later in the first round. Like, there's nothing that implies that these guys are going to have a run on them early. And I don't know if you get maybe 2 of the last 5 picks going with a corner to put this over. And so that's why I would be in that camp specifically, trying to estimate what we would look at. Question, what about Amos from Mississippi? I have him right here. That's good timing. Again, as we go through this, you're definitely following along. I appreciate it, Ryan. I have nothing highlighted specifically. There's one comment that says, well, this guy's not really good enough. He really improved last year. He worked them maybe into the 3rd round and no later than the 4th. That's where it is on Amos. Like, after quarterback number 6 in the guide, there's really no first-round comments that pop up at all. Next one up is, I guess I had the incorrect banner up there, so I apologize for that. Next one up is safeties specifically, which will be the last position group that we talk about. Malachi Starks, of all the players that I read about on offense or defense in this 100-plus page guide, the level of positivity, because it's very clear what Bob does, and I think it makes for great reading. And he has basically both sides of the pictures painted. So again, I'm really hoping to get him on the show so I can ask him about it. But my speculation is that through 50 years of covering the NFL, he has access to all these scouts and all these teams and all these departments. And he puts out, whether it be an email or a phone call or whatever it might be, to contact everybody, and just pulls in all of this information from all these teams for all these players. And then he takes out the most prevalent quotes on these players, and he tries to weigh the good with the bad to paint the upside and the downside for each of these guys in the draft. And so for anybody else who's reading the guide, you'll know what I'm saying. But for those that haven't, you'll be reading about a guy, and it'll be like, this is really exciting. This is really exciting. This is really exciting. This guy's going to go higher than expected. This guy's really good. Oh, this guy's terrible. Like, there's very rarely for any of the top guys a scenario where it's just all positive or all negative. Like, he really does a good job of trying to paint both viewpoints so you can come away with a well-rounded discussion. For Malachi Starks specifically, I've highlighted all of this for Starks. There's nothing negative about him anywhere in this. The whole, 300 words is about how everybody loves him, how great he is, how everybody stands on the table when they talk about him, top 20. If he comes out last year in the draft instead of this year, he's easily a top 10 pick. I think he's one of the most valuable defensive players in this draft because he can play safety or down as a sub defender. Who would you rather have, him, who's never missed a game, or Will Johnson, who's missed every other game? I would be fighting for Starks in the draft room. It's really hard to find guys like this. Last year, I mean, it's just glowing positivity for everything about Malachi Starks, more overwhelmingly so than almost any other player in this draft guide. Now, I have to caveat that by saying that in the prelude to the safety position, there is a comment how executives made note of the safety position overall being very devalued. And so one specific executive said, I don't see a lot of safeties going early just because of the way the rules are these days. With all the targeting rules in college football, safeties can't enforce anymore. You can't hit anybody. So you're making sound tackles, but it's not the enforcement type tackle. It's worse in college because you don't want to get kicked out. The position value is diminished just because the way the rules are. If they can't cover, a lot of the bigger ones become linebackers, and a lot of the smaller ones are playing nickel and safety. So there is a sense around the safety position that it's devalued in a way. But you have a guy like Malachi Starks, who's certainly just getting glowing reviews throughout this entire thing. Same thing happened on the conference call. He was not put in the same category as the other two Georgia guys, but he was held in very high regard. So his draft position specifically, if you just want to act on that, 23.5 minus 115 aside, that's the exact same price from when it opened. I think that's a relatively fair number, but hypothetically, if you're looking at how these scouts are going to act and how they're going to bet, that is certainly a guy that I think they would be looking at the under. Number 2, Nick Manwari from South Carolina. I think he's a notch below Derwin James was a comment. I don't see how that guy falls, but they're comparatively to Malachi Starks. He has more like football immaturity. I had him second round. They'll probably try him at linebacker at some point. He's got top 20 talent, but there's some bells and whistles that come with him. You just have to be sure that you know. Another one said, buyer beware. Now, I know that his first round price has been bet up. There's some ties to Quinyon Mitchell specifically and how he looks and compares as like a size comparison and how he might be used. And so a lot of comparisons lately, the Eagles guys have become very popular. And we've seen teams kind of buy into that. But his first round price specifically has gone up a little bit as well. And so there's some expectations there. He's minus 1,400 to go in the first round. That's pretty extreme for a price. Starks just minus 650. So certainly a difference in the market between how both of those guys are talked about. As Starks minus 650 to go in the first round. No, it's a big price. Maybe it's not crazy and out of line based on how this is being discussed. Some of the references to him going inside the 20s. But if you're looking at that, you're probably betting that under 23.5 rather than looking at that first price specifically. Right next to him, as I'm looking at these first round prices, is Tyler Booker, minus 600. Yesterday, we talked about how there was a lot of commentary from these scouts about how he's guard number 1 and going to go in the first round. So maybe another guy, especially if you're looking a little bit later, like FanDuel puts up that parlay option where you can put guys together at bigger prices. That might be another guy that you circle if you're putting together one of those parlays as well. So I think of the safety group, that Starks under is the hypothetical bet that we would probably expect from scouts if they were able to bet and do anything with the draft. All right. Outside of a banner gaffe on my part, I think that was another pretty good show. Good comments from the ones yesterday. Good comments from the newsletter as well. So I'm glad to see that everybody has been enjoying that. Again, you can head over to footballbetters.com for the free email newsletter if you're interested in signing up. All of the quotes that I referenced in this episode are available for anybody to read at golongtd.com. It is the Bob McGinn draft guide. It's about 110,000 words, very few stats, no charts, no graphs. It is all commentary and quotes directly from guys who work for the team, executives around the league. It's been a very, very enjoyable read since I printed everything out on Friday once it was done. If you're interested in it, I would highly recommend signing up over at golongtd.com for Tyler Dunn's site. You get a lot of really good football info overall, but then obviously you get the Bob McGinn draft guide as well. So that has been fantastic for anybody who wants to follow it and get a little bit more. And the last thing I'll say before you go, if you're not on Odds Logic already, this is something I talk about every single show. If you're betting baseball, if you're betting basketball, maybe you're into hockey playoffs, oddslogic.com is the best place to get live odds and compare odds at different sports books. Keep up with injuries, news, and alerts. It works on desktop. It works on mobile. It is the same speed or faster than competitors, which are all 5 to 6 times the price. And if you don't believe it and you want to try it, you can use the promo code RAS for a free 7-day trial. I use the mobile version even on a day like it's just become a habit where I pull up Odds Logic. I'm not betting on basketball or baseball. I still have to look at it. It's a really, really good product. And just like the draft guide where I've heard very few negatives, I've yet to hear someone sign up for Odds Logic and not enjoy it. So if you haven't signed up yet and you are betting actively every single day, oddslogic.com, free 7-day trial. Use promo code RAS. Adam is absolutely living the draft. I love it. I've enjoyed it too. Did a little bit with it last year, doing a little bit with it this year, trying to do shows more frequently throughout the off season. So it'll be draft this week. I'm really trying to get guests to come on. I'm trying to get Dane Brugler, trying to get Bob McGinn, trying to get a few other guys. And so I'm hoping that this is something that we can have some guests on between now and next Thursday. After the draft will be some reaction stuff in that final week of April. Then it's anticipating some of the scheduling that will come out. Then it'll be a week of win totals, maybe a little bit quieter sort of draft or like schedule stuff into May as things slow down a little bit. And then June, we get into OTAs, team previews, player previews, and a whole bunch of stuff like that. So that would be it. David, did you say Alfred Collins first round for sure? I have not. That he was again in the draft guide. They had defensive tackles and edges and linebackers all separated. And so it was a little bit messy on how that ordering was. So no, I was not saying that, but they had him specifically as D-line in the breakdown as number 2, which obviously would not be number 2 for all defensive linemen, tackles and edges included. But because of how the guide was broken out, it's a little bit messy translating it over directly into this. So I did not say that. If that was how it was implied, I hope that wasn't the case. But that is how it's listed in the guide. And so where he would rank comparatively with all those positions lumped together, I don't know exactly on how Bob would have it, but that's how it's been staged up. Crunch Time Sports Advantage says fantastic information over the past few weeks. I'm glad you've been enjoying the shows, and I appreciate you popping by for each of them as well. All right. Have a fantastic Tuesday, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the day. We'll chat with you guys again, same time tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, here on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and X.